Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one stop shop for all things Commanders. It's a football Friday, and from Check the Mic podcast, Steve Palazzolo is our guest again today. How are you, Steve?
Doing great. Thanks for having me back.
Man, it's good to have you back. It's been an interesting offseason, as they all seem to be for quite a long time. Before we get into the Commanders, I'd like to take a broader view of the NFL, Steve, and I think about the necessity for teams to find a quarterback and the pressure it puts on organizations. I mean, if the comp for Fernando Mendoza is somewhere between Matt Ryan and Kirk Cousins, you say that's nice, but I don't know that would have been a first round pick a couple of years ago. It's not the college job to train these kids to be NFL quarterbacks. They're trying to win, but it puts an odd circumstance, I guess, on the NFL teams looking for quarterbacks, because essentially for a decade at least now, if you don't have one, you need one.
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback's always the hot button issue, and it is one of one is as far as unique positions in sports, right? We have in basketball one player because there's only 5 on the court at a given time, and they don't sub as frequently as, say, the NHL. One player can make a huge impact in the NBA position, regardless of position, right? But there's no other position in sports that has the type of impact that the quarterback has. And then you get into the fact that the expectations are different for quarterback versus anyone else as well. Because I think, look, I could rail about this forever and talk about it, but we don't treat any other position like this. We don't treat any other position like, man, you only found the 15th best edge rusher. You're in trouble. You know, you gotta move on, get that guy out of the building. I mean, was Tua Tagovailoa a hit or a miss for the Miami Dolphins? You know, go look up his numbers. They went to the playoffs. He wasn't bad with Miami. And then you get to this point where Dolphins fans are like, nope, thanks, we're out, we're done. And, you know, he's QB 12 to 15 through much of his career, and you saw his limitations. And so that's the tricky part with the quarterback. And when you don't have one, I've been tweeting about this a lot, and I don't think anybody's great at evaluating and knowing who the next guy is. You know, show me the person that had Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes. That, you know, Joe Burrow was easy. He was the only one that was, you know,
clear cut
QB1 right at the top. And even the other, you know, QB ones at the top, Trevor Lawrence took a few years to get going. And, you know, he still hasn't maybe gotten to that exact peak. And Caleb Williams is still TBD. This thing is difficult to do. And so because of that, I think we all have to either as evaluate, I mean, you can do whatever you want as a fan, just have some fun, you know, be bold or whatever. But we don't need to, I think NFL teams just have to take shots, right? They have to, if you don't have one, I always say, what's the alternative? Say the Raiders this year, the Jets last year when they signed Justin Fields. Like, what's the alternative? The Cardinals this year. What's the alternative to drafting Carson Beck in the 3rd round? So I just think QB is really unique, one of one, the unique position in all of sports. You have to take some shots. You can't only trust your evaluations, because I don't think anyone's got the edge in evaluating quarterbacks. And then I think you have to embrace that uncertainty that you might not know what you're talking about at the quarterback position. Right. I mean, it's like Kyle Shanahan is an offensive genius. They traded the farm for Trey Lance and then stumbled into Brock Purdy. That's not being an evaluation genius. That's pure luck. And Kyle's great at developing quarterbacks. But as great as he was, he didn't turn Trey Lance into anything. He turned Brock Purdy into something. So again, it's like an uneven outcome. When you hit on the quarterback, the results can be unbelievable and astronomical. When you miss, all right, well, you're in the same position you were before, so you move on. So I think that's how I feel about the quarterback position overall.
If the NFL head coach's leash was generally longer, would it affect that? I'm thinking like you can draft a quarterback purely off talent, because you need that talent in the building if you want to try to like win now, which coaches have to do. But if you're a Kyle Shanahan and you have a longer leash, maybe you can draft a kid that you know works better in your system, and you can move along in that way, because it's like a what have you done for me lately type league. Is it harder for coaches to be able to get that kind of productivity out of their draft picks?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I remember talking to a veteran, former NFL quarterback who thought, say, the Titans last year when they had Cam Ward, thought, oh, they should have looked at Sam Darnold. before anything, before the offseason started, when Darnold was a free agent. And I'm thinking, well, they would never do that. Like Brian Callahan, he's a young coach. Like, you're going to go get Sam Darnold and not pick number 1 overall.
Mm-hmm.
You got to say, I'm as the head coach, as an offensive guy, you're selling to the owner. I'm the guy. I know how to develop the quarterback, and I worked with Joe Burrow. Just give me the draft pick, and I'll take care of him, right? Whether that's true or not. I mean, and then in Kyle's case, if he knew Brock Purdy was going to be what he became, he wouldn't wait till the last pick. He wouldn't risk not getting
right.
Brock Purdy at the very end. Again, I don't think there was some secret genius in drafting Brock Purdy, but it goes back to just take some shots. And Brock Purdy's and Tom Brady's and those 6th and 7th round picks who actually start games, never mind Super Bowls or go to Super Bowls. Those guys don't show up for 15 or 20 years at a time, as we've seen, but you just got to keep taking shots. But yeah, the coaching position, yeah, you've only got 2 or 3 years, and you want to hitch your wagon to somebody that you trust, and there's only so many of those guys to go around.
And see, that's a great point. I feel like with the rookie wage scale, it's more likely and it's easier to take shots because if you miss, it's not detrimental, going to destroy your team altogether. Doug and I were talking offline before you jumped on about the NIL era and how it affected quarterbacks. I'm curious about what your thought, because me and Doug actually had a disagreement. I think the NIL era prepares quarterbacks even more so than what we have in previous years, because pretty decent quarterbacks, maybe not the number 1 pick overall, maybe a first rounder might stay in college a little bit longer to potentially get more games and take those paychecks to play more, get more experience. But Doug seems to think that at the pro level, the game is more sophisticated, so might be losing out on that quick acceleration of acclimating to the pros. Do you have one stock one way or the other on that?
I would probably lean to more games being better, even if they're not exactly like for like as far as the NFL. I know everybody cites the old Parcells thing of 30 starts and senior quarterback. I still don't know if that's actually good or if it was just a thing that he thought out loud way back in the day. It doesn't mean his hit rates are better than anyone else's, but it's funny how the trends go in the NFL. I thought we hit a trend right before 2020, whereas Mahomes and Lamar and Herbert and more toolsy quarterbacks that really developed at the NFL level, and they had some experience as well. But then we hit this stretch of the Brock Purdy's and Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix, and now all of a sudden we've got guys that have, in Bo Nix's case, he had the Bill Parcells twice over. He had over 60 starts in college, right? So, and Jaden Daniels was like a 4-year starter. So then you go back to this stretch of we've got really experienced quarterbacks, but Sam Darnold was a redshirt sophomore. Jameis Winston was a redshirt sophomore. It took Darnold a few years, but then you have Jameis. Like he was pretty much the same guy from when he stepped foot on an NFL field to what he is now. So it's just a funny position because I don't think we all love to talk about it and analyze it. I don't think I'm a data guy, right? Like I don't think you could say, well, this thing worked and these things didn't work, and get to any conclusions, because for every time, like the debate about do you sit a quarterback or start him right away, for every time you say, well, Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, they sat, and Aaron Rodgers sat, it's like, great. Well, Peyton Manning started from day one. He took his lumps and he was great, and Carson Palmer sat and this guy started, right? Andrew Luck started, right? So everybody's got different answers when it comes to that stuff. So, and nothing's clear. Like there's nothing clear cut. This is the way to do it. That's my answer on NIL. I don't really know, and I don't think we'll have enough information. But my feeling would be maybe the more
gameplay exposure,
reps, that probably helps you more than it hurts you.
The other side of that, I guess, what I was saying, George, is in college, how many systems in college ask these quarterbacks to throw over the middle and read tight windows, and then, and then you get to the next level, and it's like, whoa. And so I guess I worry about the two games being just so totally different. Like college football is not NFL football in many ways. It's
absolutely true. But again, I go back to, like, you hear Tom Brady, the kids just aren't developed these days. But I'm coming at this from a different angle. I don't think the NFL is bad at evaluating quarterbacks or developing them. I think they develop them at exactly the rate that you probably should. There's only 32 starting jobs. As soon as you're in the bottom half of starters, your team doesn't want you anymore. As soon as you're in the top 4, you're a perennial Super Bowl contender. It's just not balanced whatsoever. Like I think the NFL it sounds weird to say, but you play games. Like the NFL goes 500 every year, right? Somebody's got to lose. So half the league is going to lose and not feel good about their quarterback, whether they're ready or not, or whether, so you know what I mean? Like, I don't think the NFL's bad at developing quarterbacks. What you're saying is true. There's systems that don't translate to the NFL, but they just gotta but then you debate, like, do you come in and take your lumps? And then you have fear. What did Blaine Gabbert get broken when he got sacked a million times and had no idea what he was seeing? Did David Carr get broken? Or were they just never going to be good in the first place? We never really get the other side of it and say, do you throw them in or do you need to sit and develop? And so you just don't get a lot of clear answers here. So I give a lot of fuzzy middle ground answers to everything.
Do you like Mendoza?
I like Mendoza. I mean, I think, look, do they run a lot of RPOs? Absolutely. But he was at Cal, elevating that team as well. And that would be the benefit, I think, of the NIL era. Like, going back to Bo Nix, I've never seen a quarterback change his style as much as Bo Nix. Bo Nix was playing ball like Jay Cutler. Like, he was a wild man his first couple of years at Auburn. Running around, throwing the ball to the defense, no idea what he was doing. All of a sudden, he's setting completion percentage and interception percentage records at Oregon, like night and day. Like, he went from Jay Cutler to Alex Smith. And we got to see that in college. And so I think that might be the benefit of seeing the guys in different systems, seeing them in different environments, and having those experiences. So Mendoza, seeing him at Cal where he elevated that team. And then, I don't buy into the narrative like, oh, he took Indiana to a national title. They were never, they haven't been good since 1942 or whatever. Like, that was a legit team. That is a legit team. Number one in my college model. I'm, telling everybody about the propaganda, the college model that I create. I had Indiana 1 in Miami 2. So I had them as a good team coming in, but obviously he elevates them and makes all these crunch time throws, third downs against Ohio State, big throws against Oregon, big throws against Iowa early in the year. And then, of course, in Miami in the national title game. So I like Mendoza. I think he can make some plays under pressure. I think there might be some volatility to his game because he's willing to make those throws while getting hit. And that leads to crazy outcomes sometimes, good and bad. But I think he'll be okay. And I don't think their offense was not necessarily that limited, but you did get to see him at Cal. And I think he just elevated two different teams, and that should bode well, I think, for the next level.
Got it. And Steve, speaking of data, speaking of models, we're in the midst of we just finished through the offseason. We're moving through the PFF grades and the 33rd team grades, breaking down the teams after the draft and after the offseason. I'm curious, after the postseason, after the draft, after the free agent additions, who are some of the big winners that are going to show the biggest improvement next year in the NFL?
Well, I really liked what the Rams did. We did a little bit of this on our show, and I listed some teams that didn't have much to do, but they did it, and then teams that had a lot to do, and they did a lot. So the Rams didn't have a lot to do, but they needed an entire secondary at the beginning of the offseason. And they get Trent McDuffie, Jaylen Warren from the Chiefs. Love the Trent McDuffie move. We could sit here and debate their quarterback decision with Ty Simpson and going for it versus thinking to the future, but I think they took care of. I kept using the phrase before the draft. If we were lining up in April, the Rams are the best team in the NFL. They've got their starters set. They've got some depth. For whatever it's worth, they were going into the draft, I think, with the fewest needs in the NFL, and I think they took care of that, locking up some of their own in the secondary and also getting McDuffie, those Chiefs corners. I thought the Jets had a really nice offseason. I don't know if it shows up on the field. Geno Smith they could win 3 games again. But I think they drafted well, and they brought in the right sprinkling of veterans and everything. Again, it might not show up in wins, but I think Darren Muji as GM is moving them in the right direction. I really like what the Chargers have done. I didn't mention them on my show until the end when we talked about this. Subtle moves. They get Tyler Biadasz when he gets released. I think he could still play. He could still play, and they needed 3 starters on the interior of the offensive line. I think, Jake Slaughter, who they drafted in the 2nd round, get a pass rusher and Akeem Mesidor, a blocking tight end, and Charlie Kohler. These were just subtle little moves that I thought were really sharp, and I think the Chargers put themselves in a good spot for next year as well.
It'll be interesting with the Chargers, right? I mean, you've got like this traditional old school football rah-rah guy, and then this offensive savant. Like, what do you see? There will be a beautiful marriage or like the ugliest divorce you've ever seen. It feels like there's something there. I mean, Herbert can play, and I don't think McDaniels probably gets enough credit as far as like being one of these Shanahan disciples that really would prefer to run the ball also to get to the other stuff that he likes to do. You expect good things out of the offense with McDaniels?
Yeah, it is a fascinating mix. I mean, when McDaniel was with the Niners, we never had an issue with them running the ball. I don't think we had an issue with toughness or anything there. But when he was with Miami, he's the head coach. They just felt like a toss sweep team. They're trying to get Achane on the edge. They really couldn't block anybody up front. And to McDaniel and the whole Shanahan tree has done a pretty good job of dealing with, I would say, lesser offensive lines and putting them in position to succeed. They just didn't feel tough and physical in Miami on both sides of the ball. Their defensive line was getting destroyed, especially the first half of the season last year. So that's the thing. I don't think McDaniel's soft as a play caller or anything, but you know how Harbaugh is. He is downhill. We're running power, right? We're running 4 tight ends and a fullback and let's go, right? It doesn't even add up. But that's the part that'll be interesting. But like on the surface, do they like to run the ball? Absolutely. And now you have Herbert's like 5 offensive coordinators deep now in his career. He's always been pretty steady. But you're trying to figure out how to turn those knobs. For me, Herbert's always been really good at taking care of the ball, but he's got this huge arm. And he can be special throwing the ball down the field. And I think the OC there always has to find the way, like, how do we get these explosives out of Herbert? Because he almost reverts back into a little bit more of a conservative type of quarterback, take care of the ball until he gets to the playoffs. But, that's what – so you're trying to figure out how to find that balance. I'm interested in seeing it. If I had to guess right now, I'll say it'll work out. But on paper, it's a fascinating mix with Harbaugh and McDaniel.
And the other one I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned it with the Rams – George and I have been talking about this for years, right? It's a give and pull league. So it feels like now that everybody's passing the ball and you get these smaller secondaries and smaller linebacker groups, you see teams like the Rams that are like trying to get into 13 personnel as much as they can, not with the intention of running the ball, right? They want you to see that 13, and now we're actually going to get our explosives out of that because you're ready for it and you've had to switch your personnel. I just think it's fascinating that McVay seems to be like a year ahead of the trend on these things.
And look, this is new. I mean, I remember going back to 2018. So he gets to the Rams in 17. All of a sudden, Goff looks like a completely different person. They have a really good season. Then 2018, they go to the Super Bowl. On their way to the Super Bowl, late in the season, they go to Chicago. They run into Vic Fangio, and Fangio shuts them down. He's just running simple quarters, is what everybody's running right now. He was running quarters, and McVay looked like he'd never seen this defense in his life. And then that's what Belichick drops in the Super Bowl. And so there was a point in McVay's career, it felt like he wasn't changing enough. He wasn't evolving enough. Then they get Stafford, change the pass game. They're running more shotgun. They're running more empty, and they're running more downhill. And all of a sudden, it went from he's a Shanahan disciple, wide zone only type of person to now he's the trendsetter. And this is what drives me nuts about NFL commentary is we all just throw our hands up and say, it's a copycat league. You just got to copy what everybody's doing. It's like, well, McVay didn't copy anybody this year. He set the trend, and now everybody's copying him. Like, why do you want to be the copycat? And this was my issue with the draft when, look, I think the Texans have a good team, and I like what the Jags are doing. But when you're taking 4th round tight ends in the 2nd round and as top 60 picks just so that you can run 12 and 13 personnel so you can look like Sean McVay and the rest of the league, if that's what they're trying to do. I don't think that's what you be the trendsetter. Who's going to win in a different way. So that's what I'll be interested in and seeing. Do we really need to copy everybody? Because McVay, when he finally became the trendsetter, then they had even more success, right? And when he changed, not when he copied. So I will be interested to see what happens there. But yeah, a lot of teams are trying to say, let's get big so we can spread it out. And that's been a strategy forever, right? If you've got a linebacker out on a tight end, the Patriots did that in the Super Bowl against the Rams. They had base personnel out there, and they said, hey, we're going to get base defense. We're going to have Edelman, isolated in the slot against linebackers. We're always trying to dictate matchups. So to me, the story, though, is McVay became more of a trendsetter over these last couple of years, and we'll see if it makes sense to copy. Because real quick, the other thing was like the Seattle cover 3 system. They had success in Seattle, and everybody said, we got to copy this. There was one season of success outside of Seattle. That was the 2017 Jaguars when they had Jalen Ramsey, because the Seahawks had the prototype for that defense at every position. It's like all you need is a Richard Sherman, an Earl Thomas, a Cam Chancellor, a Bobby Wagner, and 4 great pass rushers. That's all you need. Like, you can't build a team like that. Those guys don't even exist. So that's where I'm wary of the copycat thing. You mean everybody's going to run 13 person? There's not enough tight ends to go around to do this. So stop being. It's like my soapbox is we stop copying, be the trendsetter.
I love it. I love it. So Steve, obviously we're a commander-centric podcast. We've had a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type of season, 12-5 NFC Championship, 5-12, a lot of injuries last year, a lot of changes here. We have David Blau, who's, speaking of copycat, potentially doing the Ben Johnson offense next year. We all obviously want to build some talent around Jayden Daniels. I'm curious, from a national perspective, what do you think the state of the team is? Do you think they've surrounded Jayden Daniels with enough talent to potentially uplift him for year 3? That could be on the defensive side of the ball, too, because it doesn't have to be simply offensive weapons. I guess what are your overall thoughts on the Commanders and what they did this offseason?
Yeah, I can't remember when we talked last, and if it was at the time when, if when you tell a team that finished in the Final Four that maybe they weren't as good as it seemed, fans don't generally like that, right? Most fans are like, hey, we were in the Final Four. We were plays away. I know they got smoked in the NFC Championship, but you're plays away from the Super Bowl, theoretically. And the thought process is like, Adam Peters is a genius and, we're just a couple players away and we'll be there. And they kind of made moves like that last year, right? They didn't draft often and they go get Laramie Tunsil. They go get Deebo Samuel, which moves were fine. The Deebo thing, I thought, Tunsil, it was like, hey, we don't have a left tackle of the future. They don't grow on trees. Let's get creative to get him in there. Deebo was a buy low on a guy that looked like he was regressing, but hey, if you get 80% of what he was 3 years ago, it makes sense. And I don't know if he's there, right? So you took a bit of a chance and you have the ability to spend with Jayden Daniels on the rookie contract. So my point was, I thought they overachieved and they weren't nearly as good as a Final Four team in year 1. And in year 2, I was a little worried about the defensive line. I was worried that in the previous year, they had a lot of sacks, but they weren't really a get after the quarterback, cause havoc, Dan Quinn type of defense. They got by. And I was concerned about the defense. Then you have the injuries and things are compounding. So all that said, I think they came into this offseason and made a ton of moves. They said, we have to upgrade the front 7, and they did it. Bringing in Leo Chanel, drafting Sonny Styles, bringing in Odafe Owe, Caleb on Chason. I love all those moves. And they loaded up on the defensive line. They loaded up at linebacker. They needed it. They needed youth, and they needed impact. And so I think they're in a better spot now than they were last year, which sounds crazy, right? You're coming off a Final Four season versus a 5-win season. I know but I think they're in a better spot now than they were last year. Tunsil still being there. Then the concern going forward is low volume drafting over the last couple of years. That usually doesn't bode well 2 and 3 years from now. So at some point you have to counterbalance that draft in volume and try to get some youth in there. But I think they're in a better spot, and I like all the moves, or a lot of the moves that they made on the defensive side of the ball.
What does it say about Dan Quinn where, even the last 2 years, the system kind of been the same, right? Just the defensive coordinator, he wasn't calling the plays. Now they bring in Durante Jones. It's, a completely different system. What does it say about, I guess on both sides of the ball, what does it say about Quinn that he's confident enough to say, one, on the defensive side, I know this is a totally different system than I've ever ran before or had on the team, but you do it and we'll build it for you because what we've been doing doesn't work. And then on the offensive side, he's often talked about when he was in Atlanta, wishing he had moved to Mike McDaniels instead of bringing in the coach for Texas, which is now
Sarkisian. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And gone that way. And so here he is, kind of like proof in the pudding. I told you I would learn, and here he is. They knew they wanted to do a different system than what Kingsbury was doing. Both first-time play callers. Again, I'm curious what your thoughts are with Quinn and going in that direction.
I think that's one of the more impressive things about Dan Quinn, and I think it's a big part of why they made it to the NFC Championship his first year, is that he's willing to change and use his experiences. You don't always see that as head coaches. It's an interesting world. His old general manager is Thomas Dimitroff in Atlanta, and I've heard Thomas say this before, and he was asked, why aren't GMs given a second chance as often as head coaches? And it's a great question because there's no real great answer other than, well, you're the GM that drafted that quarterback and you ran that team into the ground or whatever it is. But like head coaches, it's like, well, I learned from my experience and I'll get better. But that doesn't always happen, right? Second chance head coaches often look like how things ended the first time. But I was most impressed by, because Dan Quinn's one of those guys. He was not a Seattle cover 3 disciple, but he became one when he was in Seattle, and then he brought that to Atlanta. And again, he's one of those guys that tried to replicate it. It didn't work. But when he went to Dallas, completely changed the way he called his defense. He completely changed his coverages. He used more stunts and twists. He ran into Micah Parsons, got the most out of Parsons. He's a stud. It's easy to get the most out of him, but he played to the team's strengths instead of saying, I'm a cover 3 guy. This is what I do. I came from Seattle. So that was the first indicator for me that Dan Quinn knew how to roll with the punches, play to his strengths. Then you've got the 2024 season where, there was a handful of 4th down decisions that literally won games for Washington. And that's why they, him and Dan Campbell going head to head on 4th down decisions. And, that was what won the game for them. That was different for Dan Quinn. Like, that was him learning and changing and making some aggressive decisions. So I think his ability to do that bodes well, to roll with the punches and not to say, this is my defense, this is how I do it, but then blend. And however this ends up working out, I think it's a real feather in the cap of Dan Quinn. And I was, I don't like to diminish what they did in 2024. I think they overachieved for their talent level. And usually you associate that with coaching, right? If you're overachieving relative to your talent, there's something to the coaching aspect there. So I've been really impressed with Quinn, even off of last year's down season with the injuries and everything. I think he's the right guy over here. And, his ability to adjust and learn, I think you don't see that a lot from second and third time head coaches.
Steve, one of the hot topics here in DC is the wide receiver 2 position. We have Terry McLaurin, who's wide receiver 1. We know he's a consistent performer. Wide receiver 2 is kind of a hodgepodge. We have Diami Brown. We have Antonio Williams that we drafted. We have Treylon Burks is like a reclamation project we have here as well. I'm curious, potentially there's free agents out there. We're hearing about Brandon Ayuk potentially coming to Washington. Stephon Diggs is a free agent as well. I know you're a big data guy. Are you a fan of Antonio Williams? Could he potentially jump in as wide receiver 2 in your opinion? And is it worthwhile to even kick the tires on Brandon Ayuk and Stephon Diggs?
I'm a big believer in putting 4 to 5 pass catchers, really 4 pass catchers on the field that just make life difficult for the defense. And, and I don't think they're there. I don't want Antonio Williams is fine as a player. He moves well, route running. He could do some damage, what have you. But I like him better as a 3. It's a lot of pressure for a 3rd round pick to say, hey, go be the 2. Sure. I thought the Commanders' best scenario would have been Carnell Tate being there, or, if they had drafted Tate and had him combined with Terry McLaurin, I think that's perfect, And so if that Diggs has his head on straight, and look, he went to New England, had a good year. He was in Houston and was having a good year before he got hurt. He's a good receiver, right? So if he's got his head on straight, he's certainly worth it. Same thing with Ayuk. I have no idea what's going on coming out of there in San Francisco. That's one of the weirdest off-field situations that we've seen in the last decade, right? Ayuk's an outstanding player when he's out there and healthy. I would take either of those guys, take the pressure off rookie Antonio Williams, let him find his way, let him try to develop as the 3. I love a buy low on a Treylon Burks and just to see, but you don't want to plop him in as the 2, and you definitely don't want Van Jefferson as the 2. I think you have to do something, right? They didn't force it in the draft at the top, which is fine. I was fine with not going Tyson or anything like that. Perfectly fine. I would have loved Tate for the Commanders at 7. I think
they would have too.
Yeah, and I'm sure they would have. I thought he was the right move for the Titans, right? They took some heat for, everybody thought Reese was going to be a top 3 or 4 player, and they passed on. It was the right move for the Titans to get that player for Cam Ward, and I think he's an excellent receiver. And so I think they have to do something, right? I think they have to do something. The one thing that keeps me from that, though, is, hey, look, they can run the ball a lot. Jaden Daniels, his ability to run the ball, you still want to protect him, but his ability to run, keep the defense off balance, find completions, he's really good at that. But you want to put more pressure on the defense, and you do that by having like 2 elite outside receivers. And they have the opportunity if they could figure out the Ayuk or Diggs, or if there's someone else out there. But I'd lean toward bringing in one of those guys.
I agree.
Staying on offense, it's odd because so many people are excited to get right to David Blau, right? And see what a Ben Johnson, Kyle Shanahan type run play action system will do for the quarterback. In fairness to Cliff Kingsbury, Jaden Daniels had the best rookie season ever for a quarterback. So it's like, on one hand, it's easy to kind of trash Cliff on his way out. And at the same time, remember that they were doing things in 2024 the league just hadn't really kind of seen before. And that was with a hodgepodge of guys. It's not like they had elite talent around him.
Right.
It's just interesting to see what will happen this year. Do you think that the offense, this style of offense, will be a boost for him?
Kingsbury is one of the toughest NFL people to figure out. I mean,
right, they'd have a job this year.
Right. I mean, just all of it is fascinating, right? He barely won at Texas Tech with Patrick Mahomes. He's always been attached to a high-end quarterback, a Kyler Murray, a Jaden Daniels, a Patrick Mahomes. Even with Kyler Murray, who peaked in his second year, and then the offense seemed to get stale. And he used to have those trends, like McVay had those trends where the league would catch up to him a little bit. And Cliff had this, it had the same trend, right? And it was like everybody thought it was Kyler Murray in the video games, but I don't know, was it Cliff? Because did it happen in Washington too? So just a really strange career. But I think we'll see what happens. I mean, nobody knows when it comes to Blau and systems and everything. I was railing against the copycat thing, but the Shanahan tree has done a pretty good job. They've done a pretty good job. The tentacles that the Shanahan family has laid across the league has been pretty strong overall. But you don't really know, right? I mean, I always joke that it's like if someone hired me and they said, well, that's, they looked to my boss and said, well, we hired Steve. He's just like his boss. It's like, I'm not just like my boss. I'm nothing like my boss, right? Like I'm a completely different person. I may have learned some stuff from him, but I'm completely different, right? So it's not always as simple as we're calling the same plays. I'm going to call it just like Kyle or just like Ben Johnson. So Blau's going to find his own way, but the young up and coming offensive coordinator, I think, is interesting. And again, it's just about it's not about scheme and system as it is play into your strengths. And like Jaden Daniels, an elite runner. I think he might be the best pure scrambler in the NFL, not design runner, but scrambler. Lamar and Allen are up in that conversation. I think Lamar is the best designed runner. Allen's up there as a scrambler, but Jaden's up there as a scrambler. But then at the end of 24, they leaned into the design run game, and that became the X factor when it was 4th and 2. Like, good luck figuring out what they're doing. They got Jaden Daniels back there. So you have to find the balance. I've been talking to Giants fans all offseason. They have to find the balance with Jackson Dart. So he's not lowering his shoulder like a fullback 15 times a game, getting hurt. And we know Jaden's got to do the same thing. So that's going to be a big part of this is no matter what your system is, if you have a running quarterback, it changes all the math. It helps your run game, and then it opens up just open passes, right? Because you just have more people to account for everything. Pocket movement, play action just opens things up. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I'm fascinated to see how it works. And I think there was a point where, Cliff stuff gets a little stale. And I think, this could inject some life into the offense.
Can I throw one more at you, Steve, if you don't mind?
Of course. Yeah.
All right. So from what I understand, I think I was following your work and I saw that you gave Washington a pretty good offseason grade in regard to their draft. You seem to be a fan of Joshua Joseph and Kaytron Allen. I'm kind of curious why you thought that and why you think what qualities to potentially bring to Washington.
Yeah, so Kaytron Allen was just a really good, dependable running back at Penn State. I saw somebody had a comment in our comments on YouTube, like, how do you not cite that he's the all-time rushing leader? Because it's the dumbest thing ever, because they play way more games right now. It's not even everybody's got the record. That's not why Kaytron Allen is good.
He's not better than Saquon Barkley. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But I like the fact that he was able to hold off Nicholas Singleton. Singleton was, 5-star recruit, elite, athleticism, pass catcher, but Allen was the dependable, workhorse running back for them. And he actually stole a bunch of the carries. They were splitting a lot in previous years. He stole a lot of the carries last year. Good for my college fantasy team as well last year. But awesome. And then Joshua Josephs, Tennessee would, they run a lot of line shifts up front on their defensive line. He just hadn't played a ton of snaps. I think he's not the smoothest guy, turning the edge, but he's got some high end plays, some power, some explosiveness. I think he's still learning the game. And, getting him where they did 5th round, was it? I think that was pretty good value for a guy that I think had maybe 3rd round type of potential. So he could play the run. He's got some power and strength. He could push. He could compress the pocket, with his bull rush and everything. So I think Joseph's adds to everything else that they've done from a defensive line perspective.
Quickly before we get you out of here, what does your computer model say about my Georgia Bulldogs this year?
Let me see if I could pull it up really quick here. I had them low. I got to get in touch with Kirby. We got to get them on board, because I do some consulting with teams, and it's tough to get this new world figured out when you can't recruit all the best guys and they start leaving you. I got them. Okay, I think they're near the top, but not. They're not at the top. The teams at the top: Indiana, Miami last year, Texas Tech. They're making the deep runs right now. So I think Georgia's got to get back to where they were in 22 and 21.
If Gunnar Stockton has the same type of year he had last year, what kind of prospect is he for the NFL?
Yeah, he'll be an interesting one, because he's got that, grit factor, and, don't don't give up and big throws in crunch time type of deal, but he's got to hit some more throws. He's got to be a little bit more consistent. I think there's so many there's probably 15 quarterbacks that have this what if factor. If they, that's why I'm thinking when we talk about next year's quarterback class, I don't know who it is, but I think 4 or 5 of them at least emerge as first round picks. I don't know who. Is it Arch? Is it CJ Carr? Is it Gunnar Stockton? There's a lot on the potential list here, though, like there was last year. Not enough emerged. But I'd say Stockton's on that list, and he showed some stuff, against Ole Miss, late in the season and everything. So we'll see what happens. He's no Stetson Bennett, but he's been good.
That's right. Poor Stetson. Steve, you're the best buddy, man. We always appreciate when you come on. Congratulations with all your success on the podcast, and we like having you on, man. I appreciate you.
Much deserved, man.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right, bud.